Hello, I'm Audra Quinn, Managing Editor of the Graziadio Business Review, and I'm joined here today by Dr. Motamedi, who is a Professor of Strategy and Leadership here at the Graziadio School of Business and Management. Dr. Motamedi is a very popular consultant. He is a recognized researcher and an award-winning teacher. And recently he co-authored an article in Organizational Dynamics entitled New Consultant Roles and Processes in a 24/7 World. So we'll get to hear a little bit more about that today. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Motamedi.
Thank you.
So as the title of your article suggests, business is changing very rapidly, and we're kind of in this anytime, anywhere world. So what are some of the most game-changing trends that you've seen and that are of particular interest to consultants and their firms?
Well, it is definitely speed. Everything's faster. There's a lot more discontinuity in business world. We have globalization. And we have a world which is becoming overly information intensive. And gone are the days where a lot of information was concentrated in a few places. Now it's everywhere, distributed. So consultants are also changing. And the requirement for their success is quite different than it used to be.
Sure. So what are some of the new requirements for their success? And speed is obviously great, but what about quality and accuracy in the work that they do?
There's a lot more in terms of quality and speed, better decisions. Margins of errors are fairly narrow. You can make mistakes readily and really be out of the game. In the past, as you know, most of the consultants were pretty traditional. We had these consultants come in and doing long studies, sometimes a year, year and a half, sometimes longer, and they would provide a report for the client. Those are passé now. They still exist, but they aren't as prevalent than they used to be. They were very expensive. And they also held the information and knowledge of the company. So whenever, a few years later, when you needed to do strategic planning, you would call them in because they had the data and they had the knowledge of the company. In response to that, the OD and HR consultants came on board. And they were more or less facilitating, trying to develop better communication among groups, but they weren't content-oriented. They didn't know the content. So their view was if they are open up and we have better discussions in the organization, we make better decisions. Those were also lengthy. And we are moving away from those two models now. Trust fall, team building, going off-sites, building pyramids and observing one another is doing that, which is kind of useful, but not crucial.
Right, they certainly have their value. Yes. So in the paper you talk about two new roles in consulting evolving, the trans-org consultant and the facilitator consultant. So can you tell us a little bit about how you've identified these new roles and how they are more successful?
Well, facilitator consultants now is not a typical facilitation that a lot of folks are familiar with. Facilitator consultant is content savvy as well as very good in terms of bringing resources together to create events and making decisions quickly. There is a tremendous amount of pressure now to implement quicker, faster, and get results. And a facilitator consultant, because his knowledge expands across the content as well as the facilitation of getting decisions and creating dialogue and discussions and more or less getting results, is much more useful. The time is short, is quick, and the skill set is very different.
So what are some of those skills? What do you see as the integral skills that you have to succeed?
Well, one is networking. When a consultant is working with a client organization, one of the skill set is to find where the real critical resources are within the company itself through networking and bringing those to the meetings, to the decision process, as well as being fairly effective in creating constructive social dialogue. It's not hierarchical, it is more flat thinking in terms of the organization, and trying to more or less facilitate the process to get good results and get buy-in for implementation. And all of this will happen much more quicker. So the facilitator is not sitting in a chair, but just walking around and sourcing different competencies of the organization and bringing it together along with management to really make things happen.
Mm-hmm. Right. So tell us some of the stories from the trenches. You've done a ton of consulting. How have you seen this sort of process change? Can you give us a couple of examples?
Well, yeah, in typical organizations, the traditional model were silo-based, and departments didn't necessarily appreciate one another, and they didn't think in a sort of a collaborative decision-making mode. In my experiences in mostly high-tech company, software and hardware and so forth, it is crucial for people to bring in those competencies and create synergies, and to creating those ahas every day, and as well as dealing with these continuities which really comes through from the environment. Competitors move and changes in the technology and customer requirements to really respond very quickly. So in a good deal of what we have done and we continue to do is to really understand from a content perspective what is the critical success factor for the organization and its success, and then try to harness those resources specific to situation and decisions and move forward. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yeah, in a high-tech company, I think networking probably has many meanings.
Oh yeah. You have a lot of, most of our assets, wealth of organizations are intangibles. Mm-hmm. It's the competencies that people have, and every day when they walk out of the company, they take all the wealth away. So while they're coming back in the company, it's critical to be able to access those resources, especially knowledge and competencies, and try to create the decisions and move forward. Mm-hmm. It's very different than generating reports and studying a whole bunch of consulting coming in and studying your organization and giving you a report after a year or two. Mm-hmm. And a lot of large companies understand that. Now they require a lot of, for their consultants to have these competencies. They specialize in certain areas, and also they have to be good facilitators with their clients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Yeah, and by the time it comes out, everything will have changed.
Yes.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then the other consultant that you mentioned is the trans-org consultant. So tell me a little bit about that role and how it's changed from the past.
Trans-organizational consulting is really new. I work in that field for about 20 years. A lot of the decisions which are made locally within the company is based on a lot of competencies and issues, information which is beyond the company. So the notion of rugged individualism that we often look at organizations is also breaking down, because the walls and boundaries of our organization, a specific company, is also much more penetrable now. It's fluid. So transorganizational consulting takes a broader view of looking at cross-organizational activities. So while we're making this decision here, we keep in mind how is it going to affect our distribution network, how is it going to impact the customer's preferences, and an iteration of that across the field. And that is really exciting. It takes different kind of competencies in a way of being much more multidisciplinary in terms of content, as well as being much more savvy to work cross-culturally, not only in one organization, one culture, but cross regions, from Southeast Asia all the way to North America, to Europe, and different pockets that you can tap in. And that is something which coming through more and more, especially around the disruptions that we have, unanticipated disruption that we have in terms of both technology, manufacturing uses, and so forth. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, how does the consultant be all places at once and with these
Thank God for information technology.
Right.
With mobile devices, we're almost everywhere. Mm-hmm. But it goes beyond mobile devices, how to really create the effect and bring in minds together, not necessarily physically, but in a change, creating the effect and settings for interchange across in the world that we live in.
And so what are some of the core competencies for a trans-org consultant?
Oftentimes, trans-organizational consultants are multicultural, multilingual, multidisciplinary. They have traversed through those arenas themselves, so they have deeper and broader and longer appreciation, longer term appreciation of events which are happening worldwide across industries affecting a client system. And how do you harness and bringing those to work together?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, thanks for information technology. You can bring in a lot of those pieces together and work through, not physically, but through the technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's incredible how quickly it has changed. Do you have any good examples you can share of real-world companies that have utilized more of a trans-org consulting technique?
Well, if you really, for example, if you really look at how typical technology is developed, as simple as developing iPhone or one of these technology, you need to know a lot about technology itself, from devices to manufacturing and generation of technology changes which are coming through. Right now we're selling what was designed and developed and manufactured years ago, and moving back on a drawing board, we're developing and designing devices which are going to come to market maybe 3 or 4 years from now. Those devices, technologies involve software, hardware, semiconductors, and those are not located just in the US, but they're located globally. Korea is into manufacturing some of those, Japanese, Chinese, Americans, Europeans. So how do you broaden to bring in all of these multiple cultures and multidisciplines together to create the future?
Right.
That is a sort of
challenging.
but that's a more of an aggressive trans-organizational thinking which involves, and to generate the processes to come up with those decisions are fairly interesting, laborious, complex. So yeah.
To have to be a big picture thinker.
Yeah, big picture, and also appreciate complexity and discontinuities which are all around us.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll see how the industry changes into the future, and I'm sure it will be just as fast.
Very fast. Yes.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Motamedi. It's been a pleasure having you.
You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us for this video interview of the Graziadio Business Review. And for all of the latest information and analysis, you can find us online at gbr.pepperdine.edu.